And as I think I say each week, my goodness, where did that week just go? And here we are again. I wonder if it feels like that to you. So I wonder sometimes when I begin if I should introduce myself and say I'm Helen. On behalf of Mindful Me in Dubai, on behalf of our whole team, I welcome you to this live over the next hour. What we're going to do is look at our subject for the evening as we usually do. And as I say to each time, I'm encouraged to speak, to answer the questions and to speak about the subjects that people have requested. Thank you for such wonderful responses to last week. My goodness, I say it often, but my gosh, I'm overwhelmed by the numbers of people who write afterwards and say how much they enjoyed being present, sitting together. So you can see as your names come up on the screen that we're all sitting together. And many of us come from all parts of the world, and many of us tonight aren't actually sitting here in Dubai as I am, but all over the place. I feel so happy about that piece, so happy that I can be sitting in my room, as it were, with many more people than would normally be here, encouraging each other during this weird time in our lives. So I'm encouraged by all of you wanting to join in and be part of this too, and deeply encouraged by the fact that Instagram Live now makes it possible to save and continue to be able to watch these live sessions. And also, for those of you who haven't caught up with us, Mindful Me have begun our own YouTube channel. Now, I have to say, in loading the videos up to it, I'm very much an amateur at that still. But I reassure you that because we are asked so often, I've started to record these too. So even when it's no longer available to us on the live IG, you can find these sessions on our YouTube. Isn't that fun that we can do that? It's quite astonishing, really. I had a correspondence with someone during the week who told me that they have actually watched one of the videos 4 times in the first day and then continued to watch. I think it was the video that we recorded about meditating. So I'm really happy that if that's what's helpful and encouraging to your heart in these times, that you can do that. So YouTube makes it available. I think that's such fun. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for waiting, and thank you for those of you who ask for saving the live timing so that you know when to begin. I'm really encouraged by that. And I'm so aware that those of you who have at some stage over the years come to sit in a space with all of our community and take part, have that recognition that in fact is what's happening now, that we are sitting here together with each other. Our main reason for doing any of these sessions is that we might all begin to find deeper meaning for ourselves, and alongside growing a sense of community. It interests me that this is happening because of the COVID-19 situation. It interests me that it would never have occurred to me, and that many of you have laughed with me during this week about how you've at some stage sat with us here in Dubai and then left, and now you have access to us again because of this medium. So it's as if the world becomes smaller and smaller. And would I have thought of doing this without this virus happening? No, I wouldn't. So I'm really happy to be able to extend what it is that Mindful Me as a team offer. Well, our subject for this evening is grief and grieving. We'd have to include the word loss in grief and grieving, because grief is the behaviour, the feelings, the process the experience of coming to some understanding about what's happening in our body, our mind, and our heart because of loss. Loss. So loss on every piece of the scale is what's been impacting all of us, especially since the beginning of the COVID-19. But as I've said often when I speak about these things, actually it's been impacting all of us, all of our lives, in many different ways. And for many of us, we've never known what to do with it. We've pushed it away, and the it that we are talking about is actually the expression of pain because of experiencing loss. When I wrote what it is that we were going to talk about tonight, let me just read you what I said. Opening into the many layers of grief and understanding how to be with the profound pain and inner suffering of ourselves and others. It's such a new and deeply challenging place for many of us. In our lifetime, all of us will eventually be touched in some way through suffering, loss, hopelessness, and acute and prolonged pain. And this is what brings us into grieving. So loss happens in so many different forms. And if we were just to settle ourselves in this moment and sit into ourselves with a breath, the different kinds of losses that we all have experienced. You know, I know that loss is a continual occurrence, and the resulting pain that comes with it is often ungrieved in many of us. So many times over the years, I've been listening to someone speaking and thinking to myself, so much here that is ungrieved. I know this, it's my experience too. So I'm wanting us to focus tonight on loss and grieving as it pertains to you in your life. One of the first understandings I have about this is how we push it away. And the various ways that we push away grief and grieving is that we try to get rid of anything that feels uncomfortable. You know this. We've been taught since we were really little to actually look, search for, demand, require, live as if happiness was our natural right, and that we should expect to be happy all the time, and that happiness is something we should be searching for, and if we don't have it, there is something wrong with us, or there's something wrong with the way we're living. There's something wrong with our experience of life. Or there's something wrong with us if we feel sadness in any shape, because everything in our world directs us towards happiness. The constant search for it, the longing and yearning for it, the belief that there is something wrong if we aren't happy, or if we aren't doing something to make us happy. Now, when I think about loss in the last couple of months, I've spoken with many of you actually experiencing the profound grieving of the loss of a loved and beloved person. So deeply painful, so unimaginably painful. And then there are the losses of the freedoms in the way that we've been able to unlive our lives in this, I say last few months, but when did it begin for all of us? February, March, really? So the loss of freedom of choice, the loss of our ability to move freely, the loss, for many, of income, of careers, of being able to go home, of being around people that you love. The loss of our normal social structures and all the accompanied fear that goes with us when we begin to think about what we don't have, what we've lost, what's been taken from us. I think we'd be hard pressed to find anybody right now who isn't very aware of what they've lost. If it hasn't been a person, then it has been place, time, position, success, freedom, outcomes, hopes, dreams, plans, travel, family, holiday. Yes, all of us on some level have lost a great deal. Interestingly enough, in my life as a psychotherapist and a mindfulness and meditation teacher, I've been aware that people get in touch with me to speak about what they've lost. Their sense of self, their identity, their connection to a society, their loss of home as expats, their inability to arrive in a new place, their loss of friends, their loss of a sense of self, the loss of identity of country and culture, the loss of a partner, the loss of a child, the loss of loved ones. Loss. I sometimes say to people that, as a New Zealander, you have no idea what happens in our country when the great All Blacks are playing a test match, lose a game. The country reverberates from it. New Zealanders get behind their sports teams. The loss of a game. But do you know, this is one of the things that our children are discovering that they've lost. Their ability for their natural life, to go to school, the routines they keep, the teacher that they know, their classmates, the loss of opportunity for all of us, of colleagues, of bonding with people. The losses are all losses, do you understand? And what we need to do is learn to feel those losses. That's what grieving is. You know, mourning is what happens when you're grieving in public, so to speak, showing people that you've lost. I sometimes think back to watching war films many years ago. Yes, I know. I was brought up, freshly after the Second World War. And the numbers of people who wore a band on their arm, which explained to anyone who they came into company with, I've lost someone I love. We knew that those people were in mourning. And you know how often people talk about wearing the clothes of mourning. In many cultures, it was an obvious thing to do, to dress in black. It's often said of Queen Victoria that she wore her mourning black and never ever came out of it again after Prince Albert died. We knew that people were in pain. But over the years, it's become less obvious. People don't do mourning. Bereavement leave is very short, maybe 3 days if you're lucky enough to get it. People can't stop their lives because they're in pain. Do you realise that for many of us, this pain, this loss, this non-public grieving can only take the form of complaint? Should we use that word? I'm constantly aware of how people project what's inside of them that they have not processed. Anger, for instance, ungrieved grief. Many people practicing a form of victimhood and self-pity. You know this, and I've said to you in the past, this for many years was me, so this is a familiar story. In my ungrieved grief, it became self-pity until I learned how to go beneath it and discover what grieving truly was. Any resentments that are unexpressed become the source food of self-pity. Any unreleased notions of abandonment become the food for self-pity if it's not grieved. And yet when you think of everything that I've just explained about what grieving is, you recognise that we are talking about sadness, being sad. I'm aware, because of the work that I do, that people come and talk to me about sadness, and they often preface remarks about sadness by saying, I've made an appointment to see you about it because of course I can't talk to anyone about this. When I ask them why, well, they tell me it would be too heavy, it would be too much, it has been too much. They've been asked to stop, they've been pushed aside, they've had it minimised, they've been told to, hasn't it been a month now, shouldn't you be over it? Or come on now, show some strength. Like, why are you still feeling sad? Come, let's go for happiness. So you know what we do? We minimise. We downsize our sadness. We shelve it. We outsource it. We project it. Or we bury it inside ourselves. Because of the incessant need to be happy, search for happiness, and appear that the grief is, or the loss, or the sadness, the difficult emotion is just going to be temporary, especially in your company, because I can see you're really bothered by it. So how sad that I have to phone someone to make an appointment, an appointment where one normally pays to express my sadness because of loss. And then even telling it to you, Helen, I have to minimise it because I feel embarrassed and ashamed that I should be saying I feel a bit upset, deeply sad. So I don't want to spend time naming the losses any more than to say the loss of freedom right now. And I want to concentrate and focus more on the notion of helping us, all of us, to recognise that we need to recognise sadness within us. It doesn't mean the absence of happiness. The presence of sadness doesn't mean the absence of happiness. It means the presence of sadness. I would like to suggest, as I have, speaking about uncertainty last week, for instance, that we stop trying to look for the unlookable, the unseeable, and embrace instead that certainty is the one thing we cannot be certain of, and sadness may be a natural outcome of that. Our fear of not knowing what's going to happen next, because we simply cannot plan in the ways that we always have. For many people, the loss of the ability to plan for certainty is causing them enormous grief right now, and they're unsure, actually, how to work with that. We need to learn to complain about it. What would be another word for complain? Do you understand what I'm meaning when I say complain? To tell, to name, to actually be allowed, welcomed even, to say what I feel like, in the mode of what you would normally call a complaint. To be able to say, I'm so fed up, I feel so, I'm peeved. We need to be able to name it, to feel it, to share it, to tell it, to offer it. But let me give a rather interesting way of explaining this. I was talking with someone during the week about our inability to really give words or true expression of what we feel like, because of our fear around how it will be accepted. And it made me think about teaching children when they're too small to share. We give a child a new toy or a new food, and then we promptly ask them to share it. We do this particularly with the firstborn child. We teach them that they must learn how to share their toys, their time, their parents, their attention, sometimes even their food, with their new sibling or their younger siblings, because after all, you're the eldest and you should know how to do this. It's grossly unfair when you think about it. We teach them that you must give away something that you have not actually truly owned. I'm big on this, and I like teaching this to children. I like teaching them when they're 2 and 3 and 4 to say, it's mine. It's mine. This is mine. Intriguingly, I learnt this from a woman many years ago, a dear soul, who had suffered phenomenal losses in her life. Her story was astonishing. She went on to have a wonderful marriage and 5 sons, 5 beautiful sons. I was around her for the birth of 3 of them. I loved that. 5 beautiful sons. She was very warm and very generous and very loving. I remember my younger children absolutely adored her. It was lovely being in her company. But she would arrive with her boys, and they may be clutching something each, a stuffed toy, a truck, a book and something. And she would say to my children, we've come to have a cup of tea with you, Mum, and for the kids to play. The boys won't be sharing these toys with you. They are just new, and so they belong to them. They won't be sharing. However, they've bought some other things in a box that they'd like to share with you. She was big on this. In fact, they would like to leave this box full of treasures behind for you to play with. And they'd like to suggest that you might give them some of your treasures to take home to their house. But today, the things that they're clutching, they're holding in their own hands, are theirs. And if you ask them, they would say, it's mine. It's mine. So my girls would say, this is mine, but you can have this. Now, what I discovered was, once they had owned properly whatever it was that she had given them, they would then offer it. Once they knew it was theirs, they would offer it. Why am I telling you this and talking about grieving and sadness? I am absolutely certain, because this has happened to me in my life, that when I own a very difficult, all-encompassing sadness and am allowed to own it. In fact, if people say to me, this is your pain, this is your loss, this is your grief, this is your sadness, have the sadness. They don't want to take it from me, then I can properly own it. And to me, that is the work of grieving. This is your loss. This is your pain. This loss of freedom, this loss of this career, this loss of income, this loss of opportunity, of time, of a beloved one, this loss of the ability to be able to plan and to know and have control over my life. This is true. This is painful. And it belongs to you. When you can own it, when you allow yourself in your thinking mind, in your feeling heart, and actually in the embodiment of it in your body, then you can fully grieve it. You need to know that it's yours. We need to learn how to not minimize it. We need to learn how to give it words. This sorrow needs the expression of words. So let me wind it back and say, let's talk about complaining. I was really interested and delighted, in fact, to find on one of the great Esther Perel, who is a wonderful, wonderful couples therapist, the couples therapist, wonderful author, amazing YouTube presenter. She said in her newsletter this week, we all must find someone we trust to thoroughly complain to. You must all learn to complain your complaints. I thought it was an interesting way of looking at it. The notion of, and she quotes, and I read to you now, from a wonderful psychologist called Susan David, who you also can find on YouTube. She's got a wonderful TED Talk, Susan David. She says, and Esther Perel quotes her, difficult emotions experienced in an appropriate and healthy amount are a sign that you accept reality. Difficult emotions experienced in an appropriate and healthy amount are a sign that you accept reality. And under the saying of the sentence, Esther Perel writes, complain your heart out. Get your complaints out of your system. Get them out, get them expressed, get them said, get them heard. Own them and hand them out. Lovely? It's a very interesting way of looking at things, isn't it? But in the same way as I say, a toddler who says it's mine will then willingly share it once they know they've owned it. I've had this experience many, many times. If you insist on saying to someone, that is yours, you own that, especially when they're very little, they'll happily share it with you if they know that it belongs to them. Do you know we need to have been teaching our children this about their feelings? We need to have known this about our own feelings. If we could thoroughly own our complaints, they wouldn't stop at self-pity. Now, you know, self-pity is not attractive. Grieving is. It is the healthy expression of the deepest wounds within us. Sometimes it's wordless. And when it's to do with the loss of a very beloved loved one, it is the most terrible, terrible. It can stay with us for the rest of our lives because, of course, deeply grieved grief is a measure of love. We can't ever not have it. I want to tell you the same thing about sadness. If we really fully owned it, we wouldn't get stuck with it. If we were able to fully feel it, it wouldn't become the self-pity of an addiction. It took me many years to recognise that self-pity and the stuck place of deep sadness shows us that we haven't dropped down to grieve it. Deep grief sits beneath self-pity. Had you ever thought about it that way? To thoroughly own a sadness means that it can be released. And in fact is. You know what it feels like when you can have someone that you love and trust and have a good old gripe session with them and then laugh about it afterwards. There is a sense of freedom with that. Yeah? And I spoke recently to someone who was telling me about experiencing a very deep grief of a very beloved person from many, many, many years ago that had remained ungrieved. And when it was finally fully owned and fully grieved, he spoke about the space that arrived within him because he'd gotten to own, feel, and therefore release it. Do not complicate this with the notion of that would be getting rid of it. We don't want to get rid of. Feelings fully expressed. Release what needs to be released. But do you know, I've grieved many times in my life for multitudinous losses in all sorts of ways. And I would be horrified if anyone suggested that I should get to the end of it. In fact, there would be an end to it. And I find myself often saying, and particularly when I have wonderful conversations with my sister, my mother died when I was a child. I grieve her still. And sometimes I think more so as I get older. And the same with many other griefs. I'm not ever trying to get rid of them. I'm trying to own and live with them. I'm trying to fully express what actually is going on in my body when I allow it to fully express. I don't believe that happiness is the birthright that we should be going for. I believe the full expression of ourselves is actually the knowing of our own truth. What we've been conditioned to do is be liked, be approved of, be acceptable, not be too much, not have feelings that are too intense, not grizzle and complain too much. We've been taught that actually feeling sorry for yourself is almost more preferable than an all-out expression of incredible pain. I have listened in the last few weeks to so many people telling me that their feelings are unacceptable to their partners, to their family, to their friends. How sad to be able to say, you know, it's too much. They're scared that if I express it, that I'll get stuck there, that I might continue to be sad for a long time. Just as I suggested that we sit into the word beyond, I want to help us all to understand that another word that describes the sadness of a deep wound is the tenderness that exists when we touch it. If we fall and hurt ourselves, you know, as I pointed out to many of you last week, I fell and hurt myself. I've recovered well, but I hurt my cheekbone, and if I touch it ever so tenderly, with tenderness, it hurts still. Yeah, I can feel it. Oh, particularly just there. That made me wince. I smacked it hard onto the ground, and I can feel the tenderness of it. Tenderness is equated with the stroke of a loving hand. Did you know that sadness has the most exquisite tenderness within it? It enables us to feel tenderness for ourselves when we feel sadness. somehow or other we've been taught to think of loss and the sadness that arrives of it as something that has to be dealt with really quickly, finished and waved away, that we must not sit in it, that we must not express it, that we must not own it, and that people don't want to hear about it. I want to help you to understand that sadness and happiness come in the same basket, that happiness is not something that you can search for out there. You can't do something to get it. You can't create it. Happiness is innate within us. It's part of who we are and lives available to all of us. But my experience has proven that for many, many people, the happiness sits underneath the sadness, because the sadness, which has been ungrieved, covers it over. Because we block sadness, we also block happiness. Sadness isn't something to be frightened of, and to grieve it is to actually experience the process of what sadness means. I've lost something and it hurts. It hurts me here. It hurts me here. The thought of it hurts me here. I'm frightened of being hurt, so I must abolish that. So this perpetual search for happiness means that when we arrive at sadness, which is containing the happiness, we miss it because we bypass what's actually there instead of owning and expressing it as deep loss. Spend some time in the company of someone who is deeply grieved or who is deeply grieving, and you can feel that they stand on the precipice of the unknown. Someone who is deeply grieving is like a treasure chest of wisdom, stands in the portal of absolutely knowing uncertainty as a truth, and intriguingly is closer to accepting it than someone who is only wanting to live happiness. Do you understand what I'm saying by this? Do you recognise that happiness is merely a byproduct of us being able to process good grief and allow ourselves the grief of complaining, for instance? Do you recognise that happiness exists within us and sometimes is exquisitely tinged with the tenderness of pain? And if we won't allow ourselves to feel that, how will we ever know the sheer beauty of what's available to us when we allow ourselves to tenderly arrive in it? I guess that you can hear me saying, to make room for the fullness of all our feelings is what the grieving process is. It doesn't have a timeline, nor does it have a way that you need to do it, nor does it have a series of steps. There are tasks to be done, but the greatest of all is actually being allowed to have it, not being hurried to finish it, not being switched off or turned into another direction. It's actually being able to say with great care to someone, this is your pain, this is your loss. I'm here, I'm willing to sit with you. Can you tell me what you would like to tell me about it? It's not useful to ask, what is it that you're needing? What can I do for you? It isn't. But to say, this is your pain. This is your grief. You're hurting. To say that to yourself. To be able to say, a good, sound complaint of what we've lost allows us to make space within us for what could arrive. It actually clears out and makes some room. I often say to people, if you could see deep inside me, you just see that I'm an absolute mess. It's like a honeycomb of holes in my heart for all the times I've grieved. Isn't your heart the same way if you could let it be? It's like throwing open the doors and windows of a house and letting a very solid wind blow in and bring the dust storm in with it, and not trying to clean it up while the wind is still blowing. It's actually allowing your feelings to be present and to have the courage to own them, to allow someone who you trust to sit alongside you and help you to own them more fully, and to recognise that the outcome of grieving is not searching for happiness. It's actually good grief. That sadness is a valid feeling. That loss happens to us all of the time. And that if we learned how to be spacious and open to our losses, we would learn that instead of searching for this elusive happiness, that happiness comes in through the side door and is able to hold hands with sadness. It's not, the search for happiness that should be the driving force in our life, but the ability to understand that opening to the many layers of grief is recognising that the underscore of absolutely everything is love. Grieving is love. If we didn't love something or the person, we wouldn't grieve for them. If we understood that we all experience grief and that it's important that we talk about the impact of all that we have lost over the last few weeks, instead of trying to get rid of it and asking ourselves, when will life come back to normal? Will I feel normal again? What is normal again? You recognise that grieving carves out the space beneath self-pity when we allow ourselves to not feel pity, but love. Pity is the poor relation of love. I practiced self-pity for years when I needed to have been grieving, because I was frightened of the pain of loss, and I was frightened of opening my heart to it. Once I began to realise that I was held in that great beyond on some level, I had the ability to hold myself, and that there were layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of it. I came to see that grief carved out a deeper me. I would rather have that depth tinged with sadness, and wear the sadness like a halo around my heart, than ever be dazzled by the incredible bright light of too much happiness, if you understand what I mean. It isn't happiness that we're searching for, It's actually the knowing of truth that we're looking for. The pathway in is through owning what belongs to us. I'm inviting each of us to make a little list of things that we could complain about, and then to find someone who is willing to sit with us and share our complaints. Have you not realised how many of the conversations we're having nowadays are when we're making remarks about what life has dished up for us? And many of us are speaking about how it's carved us deeper, and that in fact, whether we knew it or not, we have been grieving for our losses. The loss of freedom. It's a great thing to lose. I keep wanting to say, I feel that one of the things that I've lost during this COVID thing is the ability to see myself as a whole person, because I've now been given a label which I've not allowed myself to use, which is old, elderly, senior citizen, over 60, not allowed in here, don't come, don't go out, don't do all sorts of things. It's rather made me feel terribly childish or childlike again, because I feel that my freedom of just being able to be has been removed for my own safety. I'll grant you that. What have you lost? In these weeks of such incredible change, what are your losses? What would happen if you sat with each other and said, are you willing to listen to me while I tell you what I feel like I've lost? Will you take it seriously? Will you help me to discover what happens if I feel heard and not judged by you, if I complain? Now, I'm using the word complain, I think, since the wonderful Esther Perel used it. In my vocabulary, I would use the word grievance. I would say, I've got this grievance, because the word grievance leans into grieving, you see. And I like to say, I have a grievance that I would like to share, and I know that it would then bring me into the allowing of grieving for it. But I want you to see the whole of me, and I want you to recognise that to see all of me, I want to say I'm peeved, actually. I feel cross. I feel hurt. I feel unheard. I feel upset. I feel as though something's been taken from me. Now, once I've done that and felt heard, and the person I'm telling it to isn't trying to fix me or change it or offer a solution, provide an answer, redirect me, shut me down. Actually, if when I tell you I'm a bit upset about losing my freedom, and you say to me, oh, Helen, that sounds like it really matters. That sounds really tough and difficult for you right now. Do you know what that makes me feel like? What would it make you feel like? It makes me feel heard in the middle of a complaint and accepted. It makes me recognise that I owned in that moment this feeling that had been moved away inside of me, and by expressing it and having it received, oddly enough, it doesn't feel so, because it's opened the way for the other thing I want to say to you. Now that I've said that, and you've heard me grizzle, moan, complain, show my grievance about my loss of freedom, it's opened what's sitting underneath it, which is actually, now I've told you that, I want to tell you some of the things that I have discovered in this space has been my ability, with a little more time and attention, to grieve more fully for the things that have been undercover. I cannot tell you how many times someone has shared with me that experience is true for them. Helen, do you know I had a conversation with my wife about how much I missed my dog when he died. I've never really talked to anyone about it, but what that opened up inside for me was a conversation about all the other losses I've experienced over the years. Do you know, we sat and talked for ages. Now, I cannot tell you how many times someone has told me that in the opening of these losses, of, we've expressed them already, the multitudinous losses we've all had, in the full expression of it to someone, in it being received, I've discovered that there's layer upon layer upon layer upon layer beneath that. And what might be lurking down there in the layers of what has not been expressed? Do you know what sits beneath is love? In all its truths, we are held in love. Inside of ourselves, the bottom layer, I have discovered, when you come at it with a pickaxe and climb to the bottom, is love. It's the love that is the birthright of our connection to our highest self, to consciousness itself, and to awareness. It is actually the knowing that we belong, that we are acceptable, that beneath the complaint is actually our own yearning to know ourselves more fully. And when we grievance and then grieve our way into the sadness, what opens is a space we may not before have navigated. It's as if we're excavating depth all the time. We're searching for happiness, which is actually hiding beneath the layers of grievance. If we learned how to adequately name without self-pity, but to share, are you willing to listen to me while I tell you what something feels like for me right now, and own it fully? You may be surprised. You discover there is another layer of depth beneath that. Had you ever thought of it like that before? I've come to see that when I feel sorry for myself, I need to stop feeling sorry for myself to experience sorrow at a deeper level. The pity sits here. Oh, you poor thing. Oh, it's not fair. Because I absolutely hate this. Mutter. Makes me feel horrible. But I hadn't realised for many years that if I could stay with that and excavate deeper, I would open into sorrowing, into grieving, into actually making a bed for sadness, of allowing it, of holding it, of actually recognising it's been waiting to be felt. That's what grieving is. This loss, whatever it is, the momentary disappointment because you broke something, because you dropped your ice cream cone, because the weather deterred you from doing something, because suddenly you discover you have a flat tyre, because you don't have the money that you thought you did, because your friend turned away from you. It doesn't matter what it is. If we actually let ourselves really experience the sadness, you would discover that you could learn how to clean out the filing cabinet, the deep freeze of all of the ungrieved grief that each of us have been holding in our lives. I have discovered that one of the greatest treasures that has arrived out of this whole COVID-19 experience for many, many people is the ability to finally begin to excavate the pain that they've been carrying, which has been hidden under the heavy layer of be busy, work, go out, etc. Do you understand what I'm saying? And in the space of these losses, I'm inviting each of you to learn to say to each other, share with me, I'm willing to listen. Can I share with you mine? Without judgment, can we just say to each other, I see you. I see your pain. Let's hold it together for a while. The fear of being stuck there is just that many of us have got a jolly great deep freeze full of it, frozen in our hearts. It needs the warmth of our attention to thaw it. That's what grieving is. Don't be frightened of it. I agree with Esther Perel. I'm up for complaints. You can complain to me. You listen to my complaints. Let's enter into the grievance of them together so that we can find what's beneath. Good grief. It's a great saying. Good grief. Instead of projecting it, what would it feel like if we owned some of these losses? What does that feel like for you? I have to tell you, it's opened up inside of me these last few weeks. A great warmth towards myself. And I have sat with countless people and experienced that happening for themselves too. Own it. Own it so that it's yours. Share it with another so they can honour it. Show you that what you're feeling is your feeling. Worthy, real, true, acceptable. And then watch what happens to it. Grieve it. Carve yourself deeper. Learn to live more broadly, more open, more profoundly. Don't just paddle into the happiness waves. The deep riches of inner wisdom that come from good grief. Actually, the sitting with someone and honouring their pain and helping them not to run from it. The standing at the precipice with them and saying, show me what you see in the great beyond, when you have the courage to stand in your pain. That. I want that. I want to live like that, and I want to live around and among people who want to live like that. True and honest and real. Breathe your way into that. Honour that in yourselves. Come join with me. We're going to do a workshop about this on Saturday next at 4 p.m. Dubai time in the afternoon. It won't be saved like this session will. So if you can, we invite you to be present. Get in touch with Kirsty at mindfulme.me and ask for your place. And let's see where we go when we speak with each other about owning and feeling our grief. Lots of love to you all. Thank you for being here.